Today, guys, we are going to take a deep dive, a look at the nitty-gritty, look at very specific amps between the Axe FX 3 and the Kemper Profiler. Now, if you're looking for an overall comparison of these units, I have a video in which I go over the entire user experience so you can kind of get an idea of which one might work better for your workflow and in your studio. I'll put a link up to that now. Take a look at that now or later after you watch this video, whatever works for you, of course. But for this video, we are going to look specifically at emulations that these amps do of one of the most famous and prolific amps in rock and roll history, the Marshall JCM 800. And I'd like to list all the albums and artists that have used this amp, but in the words of Big Mike here, that list would take 5 years to complete. So before we get started, I need to explain something that's important when doing these kinds of comparisons, because they're not really apples to apples due to the way that they both handle modeling differently. With the Fractal, the modeling is done by emulating the actual circuitry of each amp and then trying to recreate what the amp does when it's outputting the sound. And then it goes to a speaker or speaker cabinet, and those are taken by what are called impulse responses, or IRs, where you put a microphone in front of the cabinet and it captures the wave file and gets a sonic impression of what that cabinet is outputting. With the Kemper, the entire process is much like the IR, where the Kemper sends a sound through an amplifier and then it takes a series of sounds. It's a very strange kind of process where it sounds like this weird mechanical robot thing type of going on. And then it's capturing those sounds through the amp and through the cabinet. So the entire process is like a giant IR rather than circuitry and IR being separated. And so when you're going to compare individual amps or any kind of individual sounds from Kemper over to Fractal, I have to go into the Kemper looking for a specific sound where they've notated what mic they put in front of a cabinet, what position they put the mics in, and then go and recreate that same type of thing when I'm choosing my cabinet in the Fractal. Otherwise, we're not really doing a fair comparison. If you ever recorded an amp, for instance, and done it with like an SM57 and then changed it to an SM58, or even moved a mic off angle as opposed to right in the cone, these are very different sounds. And so if you're comparing a Kemper sound with a 57 on the Marshall, and I take that same exact Marshall and even the same cabinet, but take a 58 or a ribbon mic or put it at a different angle, it's not going to sound the same anyway, so you're not really comparing the same things. So when we do these comparisons, I'm making sure they're as close as possible on every stage of it as possible. All right, I know that's a lot of talking, but I kind of wanted to make sure you knew there's some inherent imperfections anytime you do a comparison between any kind of modeling unit versus another. So now what I've done here for this comparison of the JCM 800 is taken 3 models from the Kemper library. I went in there first, found good premium models made by people that they feature, and found ones that include as much detail as they can on which speaker cabinets they were using and what mics they were using, hopefully what kind of placement they were using with the mics. So when we do the comparison and I go into the Axe FX, I can then create the sound in the Axe FX, pull the amp in, pull in a matching cabinet through their giant list of cabinets with the right microphone on it. So we're getting as close a comparison as humanly possible. Now, as I go into the song, I'm going to do a clean, a mid-gain, and a high gain for each one. I'll label each one number 1 and number 2, so you can kind of guess as we go along which one is the Axe FX and which one is the Fractal. And then, of course, I'll reveal it after the music is over. And I'm going to do them like dry mono for a little bit for each one, so you can hear it naked by itself. And then I'll put it in context of something more musical, maybe split stereo for rhythm parts, or a lead with a little verb or delay on it. But whatever effects I use, they will be the same exact effect from a studio plugin on each the Kemper and the Axe FX, so that I'm not doing anything different, no different compression, nothing like that. They're just the same sound on each with the same plugin on each. So all that said, let's finally get into the comparison and roll the music. Okay, so in the song you just heard there, sample number 1 for the clean sound was the Kemper, and sample number 2 was the Axe FX. I did the same for the mid-gain, sample 1 Kemper, sample 2 Axe FX, and then finally on the high gain sound I reversed it, and sample number 1 is the Axe FX, and then sample number 2 is the Kemper. So I hope this little foray into the JCM 800 gives you an idea of what you might like better as far as sonically for each one of these units. That's what these videos are for. You know, for most of us, you can't really go into a store. Stores don't often carry these things in many places. You can't just plug in and play around with them and see what you like, so you kind of have to count on these YouTube videos to see which one you're going to like better. And as always, if you have any questions about any of this, comments, something you'd like to see further, recommendations for a video or ideas, please leave them below. I always get back to everybody as soon as I can. And until next time, keep making great music. Hey friends, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. It makes the whole world better.